How's it going, y'all? Rosendo from MLH here. Welcome to Global Hack Week season launch. I see that we've got the chat buzzing right now with folks joining us from all over the world. It's great to see. A couple of questions coming in. Specifically, this one I wanted to just quickly address with regards to cloud computing. I don't think this workshop is going to be hard for you to follow. Definitely follow along. It's basically going to cover some basics in terms of deploying your applications and your projects. So yeah, we've got a really great one in store for y'all today. If you've never heard of Defang before, they are a great platform, and it's like really going to make your lives easier in terms of getting your projects out there to the world and sharing them with everyone you know, just getting them fully deployed, built, deployed, and managed, as a matter of fact. So today we're going to be joined by Leo from Defang. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring him up to the stage, and hopefully y'all could give him a warm welcome. Welcome, Leo. I'm going to unmute you really quickly, and then I'm going to go ahead and get back into the... So yeah, you're still on mute there.
All right.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Hey, guys. I'm Leo, CTO of Defang. Yeah, thanks for joining us today on this workshop. Cloud computing, I see people asking, can I follow if I have never done this before? I don't know anything about it. This is perfect. This workshop is for you. That will get you right started and up into the cloud. So I'll have some slides to share with you guys first, but we'll jump into the command line and halfway through. So, you know, you can follow along. There are some prerequisites. Maybe take some few minutes to download, go to our homepage, defang.io, install the tool. We'll walk through that in a little bit. But yeah, let's get right to it. So this is about using the Defang tool to deploy your application. We'll do more than just deployment. We'll also get you started developing the application, and also we touch a bit upon debugging once you're up and running. So what is Defang? It's a command line tool to deploy and manage your cloud app. So command line, that's the scary terminal on your computer where you use those commands to run different things. We're a tool there. We also have a portal. We also have one-click deploy. So if the command line is maybe too intimidating to start with, check out our website. Each sample has a one-click deploy to get you started without downloading the tool. But today we'll be using the command line tool. The other thing to note is we follow the Docker Compose spec. Docker is a way of running applications in different environments and to containerize them, to package them, so you can move them from one computer to another computer, multiple computers. We follow that same specification. So if you're familiar with Docker, if you're familiar with Docker Compose specifically, this is going to be a breeze. This is going to be very easy for you. We use the same files, compose.yaml, if you're used to that. If you don't know anything about the file, we'll touch upon it. We'll show you what it looks like. You can still keep using Docker. So Defang is complementary. You can keep using Docker if that's what you're used to. You can use Docker for your local development. Defang is the tool you'd use to deploy your stuff to the cloud. So that's the intro. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I have some colleagues joining as well. They'll be able to answer some of those. So what do you need to get started? Well, you need a laptop or a computer. We support macOS, Linux, and Windows. So any of those three should be good. You'll probably want an editor. I use Visual Studio Code. Use your favorite editor. You'll need the Defang command line. Next slide will tell you how to get that. You'll need a GitHub account if you don't have one already. During the login process, you'll be able to create a GitHub account if you don't have one yet. You'll need some basic knowledge of the command shell. So cd, ls, make dir, these are some of the commands that are good to know. And Git, of course, GitHub. You probably know Git already if you have a GitHub account. So let's get started with the installation. These are the three most common ways to install the tool. On Mac, you'd use brew. On Linux, you'd use the install script. And on Windows, you can use winget. If you have an older version of Windows without winget, you can follow, either scan. This QR code points you to our documentation site for the alternative installation methods. Go to our homepage as well. You'll have different ways. You can download manually, unzip the file, this kind of thing. But these are the three easiest ways to install. If you haven't done this already, this shouldn't take long. Usually takes a few minutes. So go ahead and do that now if you haven't done it already. If you run into issues, send a question on Discord or here in the comment section, and we can go right to it. I see a question like what Docker is. Yeah, like I mentioned, it's a little tool to package your applications, a little bit like zip, if you're familiar with that. You can have many files, you can zip them together, you end up with a single file. Docker is a little bit like that in that it packages a project, but this is actually more than just a zip file. It's actually an application that you can run. Even though it's a single file with many files in it, it's an application that you can run. You can run it on the local machine, and then you can say, okay, I want to run it in the cloud, and it'll be the same thing. So think of it as a package. Technically, it's called a container image, but yeah, think of it as a package. And Docker, the tool, helps you run those packaged applications. So yeah, you don't need knowledge of Docker, but if you are familiar with it, this is going to be easy to understand. All right, so I'm assuming people have installed one way or the other the command line tool. If you don't have the command line tool, stick around. You'll get a demo what it looks like. You can do it on your own time. And this is what that will look like once you have it installed. So let me show you what that is. So I have installed the Defang command line tool. You type Defang, you should see this help screen. of different commands that you can do. And we'll start with Defang generate. This is the easiest way to get started. So Defang generate will give you, with a few simple questions, get you up and running. And so we'll go through that. So we'll pick a language of choice. I'm very familiar with Node.js. If you're a Python or Golang programmer, go right ahead and pick what's familiar to you. I'll pick Node.js for this presentation. And then you get a list of our samples. So you can go through this list. You can start typing and find something that you, for example, we have an OpenAI sample. You can type OpenAI, get that. We can generate a sample from scratch, which is this first one here, generate from AI. Pretty cool. You know, you give it a command line prompt and it'll generate a project from scratch. But for today's workshop, I'll stick with a predetermined sample, for example, Next.js, very popular JavaScript web framework. So I'll start with that. This is going to be a very simple app. It's not going to do much, but that is perfect for this small workshop. The next question we get here is, what folder would you like to create a project in? I'll go ahead with the default, which is the name of the sample that we picked. And so now the tool has downloaded the sample from our website and put it in a folder. You can see here, it says, do you want to deploy the service? You go to cd Next.js because it created this subfolder for us. We go right in there. We see those files, right? You can see a README, the compose YAML that we talked about. We'll touch upon that, and a new a subfolder web. All okay? Are we good? The install command, you can find that on defang.io. So if you're on Mac, you can use Bro. And let me show you what the website looks like. So defang.io. And here you'll have the different ways of installation. So if you're on Mac, you click this and it will copy paste for you, put it in the clipboard. On Linux, you can use the curl command. On Windows, you can use winget. If you happen to use Nix, you can use this. Yeah, okay. So, and again, don't feel rushed. You can do this after the workshop. Just maybe pay attention and we'll go through those steps for you. So Defang generate, we did that. If you use the AI feature, here are some of the prompts that we know work well. Of course, you cannot say to the Defang generate command to say, okay, build me a twitter.com and expect it to spit out all the complicated things that you'd need for a cloud application like X or Twitter. But if you go smaller, these are some of the examples that have good results. So a simple hello world, or a cloud service that downloads a file from S3, or an HTTP endpoint that redirects to a random cat picture. These are things that work very well. If we have time, we'll try one of them and see how that goes. Yeah. And so what is that project? What is a project? So Defang generate creates a project for us. What is in it? As we've seen before, there's a compose YAML. And then there's, depending on the language that you picked, you'll have different files in there. For a JavaScript project, you can expect a package.json and a main.js file. For a Python project, that's a main.py and a requirements.txt. And from a Golang project, you can expect a main.go and a go.mod. So it's very similar, right? All of them have a main file, and then they have a file with some dependencies, like I will need these libraries, and different languages have different ways of doing that. And then there's the fourth file here, Docker file, we haven't talked about. That is the file that I mentioned that Docker uses to package your application. We'll also go through that. So what does a JS file look like? Again, different languages, this will look very different. I'll show you the JavaScript here. A very similar pattern in all the other languages, where you pull in your dependencies on the top of your file. Then we create a web server, because we're going to be running in the cloud. We're going to be listening for people connecting to our service. And so a typical web server in JavaScript will look like this. and it will give you a reply, welcome to Defang. And then the third part here is actually listening for connections from the internet. So going back to our project, after the Defang tool actually opened the editor for me, so it's opening Visual Studio Code here for me, and we can see those files. So because this is a sample, this is not a generated one. Each sample will have a different folder layout. So depending on the sample you pick, this will look slightly different, but all of them will have those files that we mentioned. We'll have a Docker file, we'll have a compose file, etc. Now to touch upon that Docker file. The Docker file is the description of creating that Docker image, that package that we talked about. It's basically a list of commands. Starts at the top, goes all the way through the bottom, and all of the commands that say copy something or do something, and to create that package. So it's a list of commands that you use to prepare and build your code. The result of the Docker file is this image, that Docker container image. And that image is like a program. You can run it locally using Docker. You can deploy it using Defang, and it'll be running in the cloud. Usually you don't start from nothing, right? You say maybe I need a JavaScript or a Python or a Golang. So you'll start with a base image. You start from something. We'll see that as a from in the Docker file, and then finally towards the end of the Docker file, we'll tell the computer what to actually start. That's called the entry point. So this is the program that we want to be running at the end. So let's go back to our example. We have the Docker file right here. So you'll see that this Docker file starts from the official node image. So your Docker image can depend on others' Docker images. And so we'll start from the official Node.js image and a specific version of it. So version 20, which is like a stable version of it. And then in red, you'll see all the commands of the Docker file. So we'll say, okay, we want to be using this folder, this directory. We want to copy some files in. So this is a package.json, like we said, like the package.json in our project will have all the dependencies that we need to run our service. So this is what the package.json from this particular sample looks like. So we'll copy those, and then we'll install those dependencies. Again, if you pick a Golang or Python sample, this will be different commands because different languages have different ways of installing dependencies. On a Node, we'll use npm. Then we copy the rest of the files. On line 8 here, we only copied the dependency file. We'll install those first, then we copy the rest of the files, and then we'll run our build. In this particular case, again, each sample will be different. This sample has a build step. So this sample says I'm copying the sources on line 14, and then I'm building those sources into something that can actually run. And so then at the end, we'll actually be running that thing. In my slides, I mentioned entry point. So CMD and entry point, very similar. The difference is not very important right now. So I could have written entry point here, and it would have been fine too. And expose 3000 is just a hint that says, hey, we're going to be listening for incoming connections on port 3000. If you recall from my example code in the slides, because our code is listening on 3000, the Docker file will also say, okay, we're going to listen on 3000, so that the server knows what to listen for. So in a nutshell, this is a slimmed down version of the Docker file. We go from something else, from Node, from Python, from Golang. We'll pick our working directory, we copy our code, and then we say, okay, this is what we want to run. So that's the entry point. So now we go to the compose file. And this is the file that describes your entire application, where the Docker file describes a single service. You can have many Docker files. The compose file is your entire applications. Of course, for many applications, you will have a single service in them. So for many web applications, there will be a single Docker file, a single service in a single project, in a single application. So, why this distinction? It's because they serve very different purposes. Compose tells you, that's where you describe, this is a service that I want to run. This is where the sources come from. This is how I expect people to connect to it. And so it serves a different purpose than Docker file, which is just about packaging your app, your service. So these are the questions that are answered in the compose file for each service. Sometimes it's only one, sometimes it's more than one. Where's the code for this service? And in compose, that's called the build context. And another question that the compose file answers is, how does this service listen for requests? Like how does it connect to the rest of the internet? And we'll call that ports, and we'll see both of these things called out in the compose file. So for example, a very slimmed down compose file, I'm keeping it very simple. This is a YAML, right? So a YAML is a file structure, and what's important in YAML is that the indentation matters, right? So where you put those words is important. So services has different services under them, and you show that by having those spaces, leading spaces to each section. And similarly, build and ports, those are properties of the web service. And again, you show that by having more indentation, more leading spaces, etc. So be very careful with that indentation. Like Python, it's very important. It's semantically relevant. So go back to those questions from the previous slide. Where are the sources for my web service? So this compose file tells you it's the current folder. The dot means the current folder. And then the second question, how does this service listen for connections? And that's port 3000 in this case, right? So again, the compose file tells you that my source code expects people to connect in port 3000. Back to our sample, the one that we picked. We go to this compose file, and you'll recognize the same pattern, right? We have service on the top, under services. So with two spaces here, we have web. Then we have build. We say, where are the sources for this service? In this case, they're in the subfolder web, right? So here we have the subfolder web. It tells us the name of the Docker file. The name of the Docker file is usually Dockerfile. So this particular line is not very useful because that's the default. But just to be explicit, this is the name of the Docker file. And then similarly, what port is our source code going to listen on? And it's going to be 3000. There's a few more extra things here. You can dig into them, follow the documentation on our website. It will tell you more about these. It's basically just telling you port 3000. There's a second section or a third section here called deploy. This will let our tool and Docker and Defang know how much memory to reserve for your application. Normally, it's not a good idea to not have this section, because then you don't know if you run out of memory, because maybe you start doing a computation, maybe you start sorting a list, you need more memory, and your application will suddenly disappear, right? You're connected to the browser, to your web service, and suddenly it stops working. And it could be because it doesn't have enough memory. So it's fairly important to always make sure that you say exactly how much memory you expect the application to have. In this particular case, we have 0.5 GB of memory, which is enough for this application because it doesn't do much. It's just a static page. And then those are the pieces. We have our source code, we have our Docker file, we have our compose file. That's all we need. Now we can go compose up. And this will upload and update our application to the cloud. So let's do that right now. I switch back to my command line. You have Defang installed. You can see here, compose is one of the commands of Defang. So let's do Defang compose up. So let's walk through this. What is happening here? Our tool is analyzing the files. It gives us some warnings. These are not errors, these are warnings. So these are things maybe to keep in mind to look at later if you want to get rid of all those warnings. That usually is a very good idea. I won't touch upon them right now. So it's uploading the build context for the service web. Like I said, build context means the sources that are being used for this web service. After it has done that, it will deploy the service web. And you can follow along in our portal. So if you click on this link, it will open the portal where you can see the progress of this deployment. So on macOS, I can keep Command key pressed, and that turns into a link that I can press. So let's do that. So this opens the portal. I'm already logged in. If you have never logged in before, you'll get prompted to log in. It's using the same GitHub login that you are used to. And you can see here logs start to trickle in real time of this deployment process. Some of these are very verbose logs. They're usually not relevant to us. This is why in our CLI, in this screen, you won't see them, because these are not important to what we're doing right now. So right here, we see that the deployment has started. You can press V now if you want more detail. You'll end up with the same detail that you see in our portal. Usually you don't need to, unless something goes wrong, then you might want to go into the verbose mode. So what is this doing? This is actually uploading your source code to the cloud, but which cloud? So because we didn't pick any specific destination, any specific cloud, this is going to our Defang cloud. We call that the playground. It's purely for getting you up and running quickly, getting something out there, something you can play with, but it's a playground. It's not meant for you to host your real application on, but this will get you started. You can see here, it's still on the screen when I did Defang help. There is a provider argument that you can use to switch the target of your compose up. In this case, it's using the Defang provider. So it's us hosting it. Once you're happy with your application, you can say, okay, I'm going to go to Amazon, for example. You create an account with Amazon, and you can tell Defang to deploy to your Amazon account, and you will have your own web application up and running. Okay, we see here our application has succeeded deployment and is now being provisioned. What does provisioning mean? Now, provisioning means we're actually looking for a physical server to host your application on. The first 2 minutes were all spent on collecting your sources, building the container image. Like we said, that is the package that we need. All of that building has been completed. Now it starts provisioning. So we have a package ready to go with your program in it, and we're looking for a server to host your project. And that's the next step. And here we see your application actually starting. So these logs, the white ones that you see here in the screen, that is your application being live and running in the cloud. And we actually tell you here, hey, the service web is in state completed and will be available at this address. Because we didn't pick a domain name, right? If you have your own domain name, you can actually use that. Just to touch upon that a little bit, we, in our compose file, in our sample, will tell you, you can uncomment this particular line if you have a domain name, and you can tell us what your domain name is, and then we will use that. And so you can have your own, something.com or something.io, and your application will be using your name. If you don't have a domain name, we will create one for you. And you can see in this case, the name is based on my GitHub handle, which is my name, Leonello. It's based on the name of the service, and it's based on that port number that we picked, because of course each service can have a lot of ports. We have a single one, and so we have this 3000. So I'm going to go ahead and keep command pressed, turn it into a link. You can also copy paste it into the browser and open that. And here you go. This is the website that we just deployed. It's live and running. I can deploy this. I can paste this link in the chat for people that want to see it for themselves. You can go to this website. Of course, it doesn't do much because it's just a sample. This is just to get you started. The idea is, starting from this sample, you can look at the code, change it, and make it your own. So for example, what would that look like, right? So we have this page. It says Next.js times Defang. So why don't we add something to that? Why don't we add MLH to that? Here. We have changed the source code. We can now go back to our command line. We say defang compose up. And we'll now be deploying this new version of the website where we added MLH. This is going to take another minute or so because it's doing the same thing as before, right? It's going to package up all the source code. It's going to build those container images, or in this case, only one. And it's going to then, when that is done, it's going to try and find a server to run this new code on. So this is going to take a minute before you will see this change. So I'll continue with the presentation slides. And we'll come back and see if the change actually took hold. So what if something goes wrong in my application, right? How do I debug it? So we have added a tail command. Tail basically means you see the end of something, right? That's the tail. So to see the end of your application logs, you can use defang tail, and you can specify exactly how much you want to see with -- since. So in this example, it'll show us an hour of sources. So let's try that. So, oh yeah, we see this is still, our previous build is still running. I'll open a new tab for the tail command, just to show you what that does. So defang tail since 1 hour. Of course, our service has only been running for 10 minutes, right? We started 10 minutes ago, so we probably won't see that much. But let's see what we get. Yeah, so here you can see all the stuff that happened to that service since an hour ago. All these times are in local time. I'm in Pacific time, so it's 11:30 here now. If you want UTC, you can do that too. You can add -UTC, and you will get everything in universal time. And here you can see everything that is happening to the service. You can see where the logs come from. So web, these are logs that actually come from our service. What are the other ones? What is CD? CD is our continuous deployment service. So that's the thing that actually packages, makes the packages, provisioning, all of that is done by CD. So it's actually the service that deploys your service before your actual service is up and running. Then you also have this web image. So that is the actual building of your service. So each service that you have in your compose file will at some point have a -image building packaging of that container image. So all the green column here shows you where the particular logs come from. The first column is the time. We already touched upon it. And then the yellow column, this is called a deployment ID. So each time I'll do a deploy, there will be a unique number, like a unique identifier that gets created to make sure you can track what is happening. So for example, here you'll see that our last deployment, the one that we started not long ago, was this wwvh something. And so all these logs are from the latest compose command that we issued. The previous one here, 23, they are from the previous compose command. And so you can see exactly which command issues those logs. And let's see if our deployment is done. Yeah, we see we are getting logs from the new version of our service. This is the one that has the new change that I made, the MLH. And so, yeah, let's give it a few seconds and we can click on that URL again. We can also, of course, go to the browser and just refresh, because at some point, there we go. So if you go to the link again and you refresh, you'll see that the website now reflects the changes that we've made. Cool. So we have created an application from a sample. We have deployed the application to the cloud, and we've shown you how to check when something goes wrong. So what's next? So yeah, try it yourself. Install the CLI. Let's generate with different prompts. We have some time left, so maybe we can do that. Check out the other samples, different languages, different samples. Some are more complicated. The one that I showed you today is a fairly simple, sample. It just shows that one line, but it gives you a starting point. And then last but not least is, if you're ready to graduate your application out of our playground onto your own AWS account, it's all the same thing. You just have to tell the Defang command which provider you want to use. So you say, I want to go to AWS. You add the AWS credentials. Then we will take exactly the same thing, but instead of going to our cloud, we will go to your own account. Before we go to this slide, let's head back and try one of those generations. Like, for example, I want to try this cat API prompt. Let's try that. So we go here. I'll go up one folder and I'll do Defang generate. I'll pick Node.js. I'll say generate with AI, and then I'll say on HTTP endpoint that redirects to a random picture from the cat API. Yeah, so I'll just keep the default folder, project one. So this is actually creating a project from scratch. It's not using one of our samples. It's going to use, in this case, actually we use ChatGPT to create a project for you, and it's done. So let's have a look. Look, you see here, it has the same 4 files that we're used to. And it tells us that this particular API needs credentials, an API key, an API secret. And so it also tells you how to configure those. I just happen to know that the cat API doesn't, they do allow anonymous access. So can hide that particular part for now. So this is what the source code looks like. Cat API. We have our Docker file. Again, same idea, right? We start from a base. We copy our dependencies. We install the dependencies. We copy the rest of the source code. We run the application. This is the compose file. I'm going to comment these API keys because I happen to know it will work without it. But many services that your service uses will need some form of authentication. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. Defang compose up. Let's see what happens. Like before, we can follow along in the portal. We'll have here, you see, this is our previous one, the Next.js sample. I now have a new deployment going on, which is service one. And it's going to be the same steps, right? It's going to do the packaging. It also already has a URL for me here. It probably doesn't work yet because it's still, as we see, it's still building the project. Like before, we can follow along in the command line, in the command. And yeah, we see the image is being built. So all those logs come from service one image. Service one is probably because the code generator picked service one as one of the generated names. Okay, provisioning. Again, we now have a second service up and running, and it's looking for a server to run that new code on. Let's see what yeah, so you see here the provisioning started, so we can already almost go there. Let's see a question coming in. Can someone tell me like how to reflect changes in code on our deployed app? Yeah, you basically do define compose up again. And that's what I tried to show earlier. You make changes to your source code, and you can do define compose up again. It will take the new version of your source code and do the whole circle again, right? So package your sources, create the container images, and when that is done, looking for a server that will be running this container image for you. It's all the same steps. And each time you make a change, you can do define compose up. Of course, define compose up takes a minute or two. So, making a small change and waiting for 2 minutes is not very useful. That's where you can keep using Docker, right? Docker is something that you use on your local machine. Yeah, maybe I'll show that real quick, what that would look like. So we have, for example, our previous project, the Next.js project. If I do Docker compose up, instead of define compose up, Docker will actually do the same steps, but without cloud. So it's going to do the same things that defang does, but it's going to do it on your local machine. Still will take, maybe a minute or so, especially the first time it has to download the different dependencies that our application needs. But when you make a change, you can use Docker compose up to quickly check, is this what I want? And if you're happy with what the change looks like, you do defang compose up, and everybody else, the rest of the world, can see your changes. Oh yeah, so our cat picture is up and running supposedly. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, so we need to go to random cat in our URL. So let's do that. Let's add random cat to that. Yeah, here we go. So each time we go to random cat, we get a random cat. So that is pretty cool. Let me share with you guys the URL. So like before, our program will actually, defang will actually tell you what the URL will be, and then random cat. Oops, let me send. So it's in the chat. Go into the chat. Yeah, check it out. This is now a cloud project generated from scratch. You're just using a language prompt that we created, and each time we get a random cat. Yeah, it's not maybe the most useful, but again, you have something to get started, and you can then look at the source code and see how it works and extend it. Yeah, so you can. This is the source code that was generated from the defang generate command. Here you see that it's looking for a specific pattern in the URL. That's why I had to add random cat. Then it's using Axios, which is a HTTP library, to go to the random cat API or to the cat API, a specific address for the cat API, and then redirecting the browser. So whoever connects to your service gets redirected to this random cat image. We see the same pattern as before. This Node.js application is listening on port 3000. So our compose file will say, we're listening on port 3000. So that's where the connections come in on. If you don't know what ports are, it's not very important. A server can have many ports, many applications listening on many ports. A single computer can, of course, handle a lot of connections. But each server, each program will listen on specific ports, and you have to tell it what ports to listen on. So when somebody connects, your browser connects to the server, now the server has to know which program is getting this request, right? This browser wants a random cat. Now which program is actually serving this random cat? So 3000 tells the server which program to go to. So the 3000 here makes sure that the browser requesting a random cat ends up in this code. That's how the things connect together. As long as those two numbers are the same, you will get connected. All right. Any other questions? Yeah, you can, of course, when you're no longer, when you're done with your application, you can do Defang compose down, Defang compose stop. This will stop your application. Oh yeah, so let's go back to Docker. We started the Docker compose up. I completely forgot about it for local development. So Docker also, like Defang, will give you a URL, but this URL will only work on your machine because it's running on your machine. Only you can connect to it. And I'll show you what that looks like. So exactly the same thing, right? This is the local version of the website that we created in our first sample. You can see it has my changes in it. Again, this will be a bit faster than doing Defang compose up after each change. So use Docker compose up for your local development. When you're say, okay, I'm ready to go. I want the rest of the world to see my application. You do Defang compose up. Cool. So try it out. We described all of this. Try the different samples, different languages. Maybe one thing I want to show you guys, which I think is pretty cool, it's a new feature that we have. It's called one-click deploy. So if you go to defang.io, you go to our samples, you can browse the same samples, the same ones that we show in our command line. You can browse them here and you can search for them. Like for example, Flask, a basic Flask to-do app. Flask is like a Python web framework. We now have one-click deploy. So maybe you're working on a computer that doesn't allow you to install other people's software. Maybe you're not comfortable. Maybe you just want to see what is this about. You can press one-click deploy, and it will actually bring you to our portal. This is just for authentication, right? We make sure you're logged in. I'm already logged in, so it won't prompt me for login. And then it redirects to GitHub. And so here it says you can clone or instantiate this particular sample. So for example, I go to my own. I'll use the suggested, GitHub suggests a random name to me. So I'll just pick that. I'll say create. So now I get that particular sample, the Flask sample, in my own GitHub account. So I have now a copy of that Flask sample. But what's really cool is that this is already getting deployed. So immediately after doing this one-click deploy, it will start deploying my application. And so we can actually go there. And now in our portal, we can see the Flask sample already starting. It's still red, right? Because the same steps have to be done. It still has to package and build the container images, find a server to run it on. Still happening, but I didn't have to install any CLI. So check out one-click deploy. Super easy to get started. You can use the portal to see how your deployment is going. Yeah, see, it's doing all the same steps that we expect, but now in this case, it's using Python. So what we saw before with Node.js and the package JSON, Python will be using pip to install the Python dependencies. And eventually, we can use this URL, and we'll have our Python app up and running. Let's see. Not yet. Yeah, so we'll have to wait. It's still, the logs are still running. So these logs that you see here, they are from the build process. Once the build process is done, we end up with the provisioning steps like we got before. Here we go. This is the provisioning step. This is the part where the container is done. Now let's run it, right? Let's find the computer that is actually running the code. And so once that code is running, we can go to this URL that was created for us, and we can open the service. The other thing that you should try is get your own domain. You know, we support custom domains. So go to your compose file, put your domain in there, and the Defang CLI will walk you through all the steps that you need to do to have your domain up and running. Here we go. Our app is up. So we should be up and running soon. It does say running. So here we go, to-do list. So this is our Flask sample. So this is actually running Python. This app was deployed without the command line, didn't install anything. I just pressed the one-click deploy button on our website. It creates a URL for you. This URL, you can give it to other people, you know, you can use it. And this is a to-do list application. So let's say MLH workshop. I guess I can mark this as done because that's what we are doing right now. Cool. Yeah, that's all I had for you today. So Defang, it's a tool to radically simplify the way you develop, deploy, and debug your applications. So give it a try. Use the CLI or use one-click deploy. Let us know what you think of it. We're still in beta, but we're very eager to hear your feedback and improve the tool and make it work for you. So this is meant for beginners, right? So if you're just starting out with cloud development, this should be a perfect tool for you. Is Defang free? So we are in beta. In beta, everything is free. Once we get to V1, there will be a paid part, but the experience that I've shown you today will always be free. So picking a sample, hosting it in the playground, and being able to actually have a URL that you can share with your friends and be able to start, that part will be free. So feel comfortable using that. Also, our CLI is open source. If you want to learn how the CLI works, feel free to go to GitHub and check it out, check our source code, you know, nothing up our sleeves. It's all there. For how long? Another question here. Does it support dynamic website? Do you want to dig in a bit? What do you mean by a dynamic website? Like the site, the examples I've shown you now, they don't use database. So maybe that is what you mean with static. You can connect to a database, sure. In fact, our portal is using Defang. So our portal was built with Defang. Everything you look at here, our portal, this is all running on Defang, deployed with Defang, and it's using a database, it's using Postgres in this case. Yeah, so you can totally build a dynamic website. Another question, when we run Defang Compose up, how does it build the infra on Defang? Can we change the logic of building the infra? Is it configurable? So the Compose file actually has a lot of options for you to tell what kind of infrastructure you want. If you have Visual Studio Code, you can actually enable like a YAML extension, and that will tell you all the options you have. So I already have that here, right? So because I have installed the YAML extension, you can see this blue line here, the Compose specification. It will actually give me a lot of options. So for example, the editor tells me I can use deploy. I can say I want 3 nodes of my service running, not just one. All of this is for resiliency, right? You can also mention, we said before, you can say how much memory you need. For example, I need 1 gig memory, right? You can mention all of those things in the compose file. So you can control, and there's a lot of options. So you control your infrastructure through your compose file. Vercel is so what is the difference between Vercel and Defang? Vercel is focused on front end. It's a JavaScript, a Next.js hoster, and it's mostly that. It's hosting your website. So Defang, we are not a host. We do have a playground, but it's purely meant for you to play around in, to test out Defang. It's not meant for you to deploy your actual final application. Defang is the tool that you use to deploy your application. So once you're ready, you say, I want to use my AWS account. You deploy to your own AWS account, and you are in full control of your application. It's running on your AWS account using the open source CLI Defang to deploy to your AWS account. We're not hosting for you. That is the difference. So we are a tool to deploy to your account. Can I use Defang for an existing application? You can, but you will have to maybe make a compose file. If you already have a compose file, yeah, Defang compose up should help you. We do not help you with migration of data. So imagine you have a database and you say, I want to go to Defang. You would maybe deploy to Defang, but connect to your old database. Like the Defang tool doesn't help you copy data from one place to the other. It doesn't do that. There's a lot of tools that help you with that. That's a different tool. No, you can totally build your own application. Like what I created with the cat API. That's an application that was created from scratch. It's not a sample. You can totally build applications like that, host them on our playground, and if you're happy with them, host them on your own AWS account. Where do I give the credential for the AWS account? Very good question. Actually, we still have a few minutes. Why don't I dig in a little bit what that looks like? So we mentioned the Defang application. So let's go to our random cat API project. I want to use my AWS. Then I need to log into AWS. So for me, that is using SAML. I use SAML to log into AWS. You might have your credentials in the .aws API. You can always check whether you're logged in by using the AWS command line, right? So if the AWS command line is happy, then Defang can connect to your AWS account. If it's not happy, then Defang cannot connect. So you can always, we use the same system. So yeah, you can see right now the CLI is not happy because I'm not logged in yet. I'm logging in now on my other screen because it'll ask me for a password to log in, obviously. So let me do that real quick. I have to use my phone to confirm it's me logging into AWS. Yes, it's me. So now I'm logged in, so I can use the AWS CLI to, so I have to tell it how I logged in, right? So in my case, for example, so if this works for you, then this will be good. So let's try our project with an AWS credential. So we do the same cat API, but now using my own account. So I point to the AWS credential because I have many different AWS accounts. I have to pick a specific one. You might not have to do this. I do the same Defang compose up. Now, the only difference is now it shows it's using AWS. It's not going to our playground. It's not going to the Defang account. It's going to my AWS account. But it's the same step. Everything else is the same. It's still packaging the app, building it, and finding a server. But in this case, it will find a server in your account. And so if you log into your AWS console, you would see the Defang application that you built running in your own account. What makes Defang unique? I think what's unique about Defang is that it's a developer tool. We are not hosting your application. We're not a host. We are a tool to help you go from your computer to the cloud. And that should make you very comfortable that we cannot pull you out of your, cancel your website. We cannot take you down. There's a lot of talk out there, if people don't like the site you're building, they can take you down. So you are in control. Your account is hosting it. Right now, we only support AWS. Eventually, we'll have support for DigitalOcean, Google Cloud, Azure, and you can actually have your application running on all four if you wanted to, using the same tool, one tool for all of them. That's where the name Defang came from. Where can I look for open positions at Defang? We are not currently hiring, but we're always looking, always good to meet good people. You never know when we need more people. Send a resume to hr@defang.io. That's our email address for any resumes, CVs you want to send us. The Defang playground feels similar to hosting. Yeah, that is true, but it's a playground, so there's no guarantees. Your application will be down at some point. We'll do some garbage collection on the playground, so do not expect your application to be running there forever. It's literally just to get you started, make sure everything works, and when you're happy, you use your own account like I'm doing now on the screen. So what you see on the screen here is still using my own account. So can we also specify AWS service like ECS Fargate? Which service does it deploy to? You cannot pick a specific AWS service, but it so happens that for AWS, we are using AWS Fargate. So when this deployment is done and I go to my AWS account, it would be running a Fargate cluster. But the power of Defang comes from the fact that you do not have to know AWS. You don't have to be an AWS expert. You don't have to know about Lambda versus Fargate versus ECS versus Kubernetes. That is not exactly what Defang takes away. You don't have to be an expert in AWS. Well, thanks guys for the great feedback. I see we're close to time or a minute over.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Leo, for putting together a great workshop. It looks like the folks in the chat really happy, really excited about Defang. I saw a lot of folks really getting excited over the tool. I just want to remind everyone that there are a couple of challenges you can interact with during this week. Definitely check them out at ghw.mlh.io/challenges. And on top of that, Defang will also be partnering with MLH during the fall season of our next hackathon league. We're going to have some prize categories for y'all at select hackathons moving forward. So definitely keep an eye out on that. It's really something great to get excited about, specifically at hackathons, because you'll be, deploying, building projects and possibly deploying them as well. So really great opportunity for you to kind of dig in and learn more about the platform there. Outside of that, there's also a Discord channel that you can join if you have any other questions. It's on the Discord server for MLH. Go to the hashtag #AskDefang channel and drop your questions there if they didn't get answered during this chat, though I do believe we got to most of them. But outside of that, once again, Leo, such a great pleasure having you here. Really appreciate your time. And everyone in the chat, thanks for being so kind and generous with your time as well. Keep it locked because we do have another workshop coming up after this. But yeah, well, stay tuned and you'll be learning a little bit about GitHub Copilot coming up next. See y'all soon and enjoy the rest of season launch.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.